Go. Welcome to the PRCA Fuse podcast for the stories behind great PR and marketing people with a passion for communications. Hosted by me, Adrian Ma, speaking every fortnight to trailblazers in and around our industry. Our special guest today is David Blois. Hi, David.
Hi there, Adrian. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
You're very, very welcome. To kick off, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, certainly. I'm David Blois. I am the founder and managing partner of a firm called M&A Advisory, which does exactly what it says on the tin. We are a Marcoms M&A firm, so we're sector specific, but size and geography agnostic. We work all over the world for different sizes of business. We're based in London, just behind St Catherine's Dock. And we have a great focus on ensuring there's a people fit as well as a business fit in all our deals, which I can talk about a little bit later. My own background is I'm an accountant for my sins and somewhat schizophrenically a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. My early years were spent with a business called Reed Elsevier. Now it's called the RLX Group. And I worked all over the world with them, places like South Africa, America, Germany, as well as the UK. And I finished up doing deals in corporate finance when Reed had a big sort of restructuring, making a number of acquisitions. And then I joined Saatchi & Saatchi in Budapest as finance director. And following that, joined a business called Results International, that were a specialist M&A firm in the Marcom sector before moving more into technology and healthcare. And then started my own business, founded M&A Advisory in about 2010, something like that.
Oh, amazing. You've had quite a varied career. Worked in South Africa, worked in Budapest at Saatchi & Saatchi. Tell me a little bit about that experience, because when we spoke previously, you said you worked there as the Berlin Wall was falling, and it was a bit of a challenging environment, regulatory-wise, for the agency. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, certainly. Well, Saatchi & Saatchi Budapest, I think at that time, a lot of big agencies rushed out to Eastern Europe when the wall came down. And I think it was at the behest of their large American clients. And they went into countries like Hungary, which really only has 10 million people. It's not a big market. Quite quickly set up agencies, but then realized it was a very, very difficult scenario, very challenging environment. First of all, the business model was completely upside down. You had a very small population, very small budgets, but quite big costs, because if you employed locals who weren't really experienced in the market because they didn't have a marketing industry, so they really needed to be trained by expats, there were a lot of costs attached to employing them. It was about 50% or more social insurance. You know, if we think Rachel Reeves' extra 1% on national insurance is bad, this was that on steroids. So it was very expensive to employ people. There was a big shortage of quality people, so they were always being poached. You had to employ expats to do a lot of the training, and that was very, very expensive. On top of that, a lot of these firms were locked into international contracts, which were only giving you 10% on media, which then media prices in Eastern Europe were about a fifth of Western levels. So it was very, very hard to make money out there, indeed. And also, it was, I think Hungarian is about the third most difficult language in the world. So
Really?
To make yourself understood, to try and improve things was all difficult. But in the end, we managed to turn it around and create a profitable business out there after about 4 years. But it was a fantastic experience of actually being in that market in such a flux of change.
How's your Hungarian now?
No better than it was then, really.
You've been doing M&As for quite some time now. Can you tell us a little bit about what you remember from your first ever M&A deal? What was the situation you were in? Talk us through that.
Yeah, goodness me. I mean, I suppose my first deal in Marcoms, because when I was at Reed, we did a number of deals there, but probably what's more relevant is Marcoms deals. And, you know, what I remember about it, it was I was working with results and we were selling quite a large PR consultancy to one of the big majors. And I suppose, what sticks in my mind reflecting on it is what's changed since that time. Now, this would have been nearly 30 years ago, and what has changed. I suppose there's been a number. One of them is that at that time, many of the buyers were the big holding companies, and they were buying very often on. They were obviously increasing their skill sets by buying these businesses, but a big focus was their bottom line, the profits. And these companies were often bought on earnouts. So to find a buyer, you almost only had to make half a dozen phone calls around the world. But since that time, the industry has fragmented enormously. So the level of research that we have to have, and the technology we employ in that research now, using AI and talking to buyers from all across the globe, is much more sophisticated than it was then. What else can I say about it?
Yeah. Talk us a little bit about what you've just said there about most of the acquisitions were via earnouts.
Yeah.
Does that mean that for buyers it's a fairly low risk option compared to now?
No, I don't know whether it is. I think earnouts are gradually going out of fashion. I think that the problem with earnouts that they equally are not that great for buyers or sellers, because the thing about earnouts is that the business is completely ring fenced until the last payment is made. So if you're on a 2 or 3 year earnout, the owner, the acquirer, can't integrate your business, which might have, until that last payment is made. So they can't realize all those synergies, all those opportunities that they talked about until that last payment is made. So the problem with that is, that the problem with that for them is that they're not maximizing the opportunity, and in that time, especially these days in a fast changing market, you can lose a huge amount of advantage by having to wait. So buyers want to integrate businesses as quickly as possible, so they're using alternative structures to the earnout right
And
now.
what kind of structures would those be typically?
Very often, and I think it's led by the private equity guys, but very often it's a significant amount of cash on completion, followed by maybe some shares in the business. Sometimes it could be 80-20. On a good day, it might be 60-40 if there was a really good fit there and that sort of thing. So that way you're taking taking shares in the buyer, and you can integrate the business straight away, yet you've got an incentive to build the business, and it also locks in the management team, etc.
And what we've just discussed there is very much a lot of the transactional financial side of things with M&A, but underneath it's all about people and culture and
Yeah.
emotion. How do you navigate, or how do you help people navigate that side of things when it comes to these deals?
Yeah, I mean, we lead with that. That is of prime importance. The people fit is of prime importance. What we say is that there's got to be three elements in a deal. There's got to be chemistry between the parties when they first meet, because if your gut is telling you this is wrong, then the chances are it is wrong. So that's one box. The second box that needs to be ticked is a cultural fit. So you could say it's like a business culture, a style of working, the way we do things around here. They must be compatible. You wouldn't put a sort of bureaucratic business with an entrepreneurial business, for example. And finally, what you need is an outstanding business proposition. So where both businesses sit down together, after a chemistry meeting, they'll sit down together and have what's called a proposition meeting and say, well, look, if we get together, how is this going to work post deal? What clients can we exploit? Which countries can we exploit? who's going to do what roles are there for us, and what costs can be saved. And usually, the most outstanding business proposition will mean the best price can be paid. So the buyer with the best proposition will be able to pay the best price. So you're able to leave the negotiations until the end of the process. That detailed, M&A negotiations. What it's all about is the people fit and the business fit in our process.
Fascinating, because quite often when you read about this stuff in the news, they focus so much on the cost of acquisition, the transaction price, and
Yeah,
don't go enough into that. And it's interesting to hear that that is all done at the end once you've got the proposition nailed, and that feels like that proposition front and center is what drives success here in this
exactly. And you
process,
can
right?
compare the propositions. I think probably everyone's bought a house, and what you want to do is it's like in buying a house. You want to go and see half a dozen, and that way you
Mm,
get a real feel of the market, what's good and what's bad. And usually there's a house that sticks out as the house you really want. It's the best one. And that's how it is with selling your agency. You need to have a process where you meet several buyers, and one of them sticks out as being outstanding, the one you really want to work with.
and so obviously that's in an ideal world. Have you ever been in a situation, and we don't have to name any names here, but have you ever been in a situation where it was pretty obvious right from the start that there was a culture clash and this wasn't going to work? Have you been there? What did you learn? No,
Yeah.
tell us.
Um, okay. Um, Usually, no, because we are very strict with our clients. We say that we need to have these elements. We have to have the chemistry. We have to have the culture and the proposition. And we talk with our clients about that. And if you can tick those boxes, if one of them's missing, the chances are the deal's not going to work, because even if the proposition's bad, you're probably not going to get through the incentive payments. So it's important that you tick all three of those boxes. Now, I guess there have been situations where sometimes emotion runs counter to those boxes and those things. And I've had a couple of clients, well, only a couple in probably 30 years or so of doing this, where perhaps they've chosen the more prestigious client, or the bigger client, or the bigger buyer, or the more
Right.
prestigious buyer. And because they've chosen that one instead of the more logical one, then things that haven't worked out so well as they could. But yeah, that's it. I'm really only there to give advice, but there's always that. Sometimes there's always that temptation to go with the bigger buyer, and they may not always work.
If you were to speculate, what do you think is driving that decision to go with a more prestigious buyer there?
Goodness, I think it's just emotion. I think, you know if you're running a consulting company of some sort and McKinsey's interested in you,
Right.
or Price Waterhouse is interested in you, then there's that always that sort of flattery, really.
Flattery, yeah.
Whereas there might be a business that's a challenger brand that might be much more aligned to the way you work and your style of working. I worked for a retail strategy consultancy once, and I think they nailed it, and they said, look, we are a consultancy, but the way we work is much more like an agency.
Mhm.
And they said, if we went into McKinsey or Bain, it just would not work for us culturally. The style of working would not work for us. And so what we found them was an agency type buyer, and it worked very, very well. They were aware of that. But some other firms might be very flattered by saying, oh no, we want to be acquired by McKinsey or Bain. And
There, there,
that's,
there have been quite a few acquisitions over the last decade of management consultancies into the agency world.
yeah.
In your view, in light of what you've just said, do you feel that there is a culture clash there?
They seem to be getting that right.
Mhm.
That the big consultancies seem to have got that right. The Accentures, the way they've done things. I think the proposition is very, very good. They've got
Mhm.
a good lead into some really big clients, and the clients trust them to deliver on strategy, and then they want them to deliver on the executional stuff as well. So that can work pretty well, providing if you keep those sort of silos fairly separate, then it's going to it's going to work very well. But if you have to almost work together, there might be that might have a different effect for sure.
Yeah, I think from when I've seen these things happen, the successful ones are where they've kept very distinct brands and even very distinct offices, and the look
Yeah.
and feel of the businesses is very, very different as well, right?
Yes, in that scenario, that's the best way, I think. Yeah.
And you talked a little bit there about emotions within the whole process. What, in your experience, what's the most emotionally charged moment you've experienced during one of these transactions?
Yes, I mean, I don't think. I mean, we've been doing it a long time, so we don't get so emotional. I think probably the worst part in a deal is where the buyer at the last minute decides to renegotiate the deal
Oh,
for perhaps
really?
no reason or little reason. You know, you agree a price in heads of terms, and they come up with a small thing and say, right, we want to knock quite a bit off the price, and that can be quite emotional. But I think what you always need to do is I always try and negotiate from a position of strength when I'm working with my clients. So that's where a process is really helpful, because if you have another other potential buyers in your pipeline, that acts as a tremendous amount of strength to your negotiating position. And I think buyers often understand that, they get a feel for that fact that you have a choice of buyer, so that keeps them much more in line. So things generally work fairly smoothly. You don't normally get that sort of problem with negotiations at the end, but that is probably one of the worst things, because you've come a long way, you've come along a big path of your client, and then to get to that end, it's
I
it's
can imagine that. Hearing what you said earlier about it's like buying a house, that has happened to me when I bought my flat.
yes,
You get right to the end, and all of a sudden the seller's like, "Well, actually, can we just have a bit more?" You're like,
yeah,
come on.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah.
Um, and have you ever been in a situation, and again, you don't need to name names here, but in a situation where a deal that should have worked on paper didn't work?
Um, not particularly. I think
Hmm.
that's probably going back to the area. I mean, where you've got the chemistry, where you've got the culture and the proposition, they should and generally do work. I don't think I can recall any situation where a deal was really good on paper and just didn't work. I mean, I've had one, in the financial crash where the buyer ran out of money and went bust, and you can't account for that. That was quite exceptional. It was a PLC, and they had a lot of borrowing, or a fair bit of borrowing. You can't account for those things, but generally, if you get those things right, the deal should work, and the seller should get all their earnouts and all of the other sorts of things.
What about the flip side? Like, have you ever been in a situation where it's just obvious something was just going to work from day one?
Yes, I mean, I suppose what you're looking at there again, that chemistry culture proposition thing. If that's good, then the deal's likely to be good. If it's excellent, then you're going to get it's going to be you're going to be riding into heaven, as it were. It's going to be great. And I mean, I think I did a deal probably a couple of years ago now of a digital agency, and they sold to a B2B group that really didn't have much in the way of digital. But they had some beautiful clients, and they had a good second tier management team, and I think they decided to work together pre-pitch just to see how they would work together, and they won a huge well, it was Vodafone, I think, client. And so, the only good thing about that is we actually got more money for the business as a result of that. But it was they worked really, really well together, and I think they did very well on their earnouts and everything else. And both sides, it was for both sides, it was an extremely good deal. Yeah.
Is is that something that's quite common in this process, where two agencies might say, "Let's test the water a little bit before we commit to this, and see, let's co-pitch for something and see how it plays out."
Yes, yes. I mean, it is a bit of a relationship building exercise. The early bit. So we have a. It starts off. We research out buyers and get NDAs in place, and then we have a chemistry meeting with the people that are interested, and then there's a more detailed proposition meeting with them to check that out. But you're absolutely right. It's sometimes not as black and white as that, and sometimes during that process, there's certainly a bit of relationship building, because that's a good way to, you're going to have to work with these people post deal. So why not just test the water a bit more and just see how that goes, work on a pitch together, see how they gel. So yes, that does happen.
And I think from both a buyer and a seller perspective, that process can actually teach them quite a lot about what they want for themselves. You know,
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yes, it
yeah.
can. Yeah.
Um, and when sellers are preparing for acquisition, what are the biggest or most common mistakes you're seeing them make?
Sure. Um, I think first of all, the seller himself must decide whether he wants to sell, because and what he's going to do after he is sold, because that's really important. What am I going to do with my life when I sell my business, or if I stay with it? Do I want to find a buyer where I can have a second career? Or do I want to leave the industry after a couple of years and start up another business or sit on a beach somewhere? That he's got to decide that. And I've seen some, I wouldn't say horror stories, but situations where a buyer's had an approach and been persuaded to sell, and he sold, and then he says, "Now what do I do?"
Yeah.
And so it's important to decide that you want to sell personally, because it's a personal decision. Buyer sellers often come to me and they say, "David, when should I sell?" And my answer to that is, "When do you want to sell?" It's a very personal decision. Um, but the second thing is, you've got to, if you're going to sell, you've got to have your business in a state ready to sell. It's got to be, I suppose, the watchword really is sustainable, and
Mhm.
that's not in the green sense of the word. It's saying that it's got to be able to have a life of its own post the founder. So it needs things like good financial systems and procedures, a good second tier management team. They're going to take over the reins eventually, and other sort of things like a good inbound and outbound new business pipeline that's going to create this sort of regular cash flows for the business. So that sustainability is really important. So I think they're the key things in terms of preparing a business. And also, would say it, but I think get an advisor, because a process where you can, as I mentioned earlier, where you can compare businesses, you can compare propositions, is really important. And it also strengthens your negotiating leverage, rather than just waiting for someone to come and knock on the door. Again, going back to your housing analogy, would you sell your house because someone just knocked on your door and said, "Do you want to sell your house?" There's always a demand for these businesses. So the opportunistic knock on the door is not necessarily the time to sell it.
Oh, that's good to hear. And talk to me a little bit about well, how soon should they get an advisor on board?
I would say 2 or 3 years out
Oh,
from
really? Okay, that's
sale.
far out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because what we can do, or what any advisor can do, is just have a look at the business and give them some advice. But there's no reason. We're very open. We'll always be happy to talk to anybody who's got a business, and they might say, "Well, I want to sell in 10 years," or whatever. We'd be happy to chat to them about their business and give them a few pointers. But the thing about 2 or 3 years out is that you can make the necessary changes in that time before sale. If you need to strengthen the second tier, or you need to implement systems, you've got an opportunity to do that, to steer the ship in the right direction before you push the button.
What about commercial performance? I guess you're looking for sustained, successful commercial performance. Is
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
You want, you know, some sort of growth, or in the years coming up to sale, it's nice if you can do 2 or 3 years of steady growth.
Mhm.
That's really important. And that way you can often then, for us, you can predicate any deal on its forecast for the next year, which actually again pushes the value up. So that's a good thing to do. Yes, that's quite important, and also good margins. You know, making around 20% EBITDA is a good margin to make.
Yeah, yeah. And before you were talking a little bit about some of your earlier deals, selling a major PR agency to one of the groups. Have you seen a shift in what buyers are looking for now compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Yes, there's been a shift. I think buyers are more sophisticated now. There's the other thing is there's a whole there are many more buyers. You know, there's different propositions of business. There's some business. There's sort of international businesses
Hmm.
that are buying in various strategic pockets. So their buyers are more sophisticated. They're more strategic, but they're looking for things that fit with their own business model, to sort of wrap themselves around their clients. So rather than being function orientated, they're much more market orientated, to try and wrap provide enough different skill sets for the particular clients they have, and that makes the clients more sticky, and it also adds value. So yeah, for sure.
So a lot of the talk in the M&A world, particularly in the PR industry, has been a lot of this has been driven through private equity.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Is
I
that
mean
something you've seen?
that's quite a trend. I mean, I think private equity backed PR firms
Hmm.
have been really successful, or any marketing firm. It's you know, you've got businesses like Team Fana, based in Austria, that are doing really well. Private equity backed business. You've got Brain Labs, the digital group
Yeah,
that are doing very well, and they're all private equity backed. I think traditionally, private equity has not sat so well with our business, because all they're bringing to a company is money. So
yeah,
when you've got an individual firm, um, probably a trade investor is a better bet than a private equity, just
yeah,
as an individual. But where they're backing a growth story, I think private equity, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the money of private equity and the synergies of a trade buyer. So that works pretty well. And that Brain Labs, Team Fana, all of that sort of concept works very well.
I mean, those guys look like they're on fire at the moment.
Yeah.
And are you seeing any trends that excite you or worry you in the UK PR M&A market at the moment?
No, I think all the trends are exciting. Really, I think the fact that as we've just been speaking, you've got the private equity backed businesses that are
Mm,
doing very well. So private equity is probably taking over from where the holding companies were. You know, because the holding companies aren't buying as much as they used to.
yeah,
So the private equity, the very focused private equity backed businesses are doing well. I think the other thing is that you've got this PR consultancies and other marketing agencies being focused much more on their clients and delivering maybe a different skill set or a geography or a technology around those clients, which adds value. And I think, as I say, sellers are focused more on improving their businesses, making them more sustainable, and they really understand. I think the quality of financial reporting has improved with technology and more sophisticated finance directors perhaps coming out of the holding companies. So that's all been good. I'm just trying to think of anything else, and also perhaps the end of the earnouts, where businesses are able to integrate quicker and realize value for both the buyer and the seller much quicker.
yeah.
So I think a lot of the trends are good trends that have happened over, since I've been in this business.
And you've been in this business for quite a while. You've worked
Yes,
on a lot of
marketing
different.
M&A, about 30 years. I spent about 15 years with results, and
Yeah.
M&A advisory has been established about 15 years. So yeah, about 30 years of doing this. Yeah.
So over those 30 years, I guess you've seen an awful lot, right, in all of your deals. C-
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
you tell us about some of the weirdest, funniest or the most unexpected things that have happened during these deal negotiations?
Yes, there are probably a couple. I think by far the one that stands out the most is I was working at Results and I was handling the sale of the largest digital agency in Turkey, or one of the largest. And we were working with one of the holding companies and a senior executive of the German holding company who was going to buy this business. So we got right to the end of the line, very close to completion. And just at that point, the senior executive of this media business got arrested for some sort of media spot fraud and was
Oh
sent to prison.
no! Oh my
So
god!
that was quite an interesting end to that deal. So we had to go back, but the story didn't really end there. We had a number two business very much in line who was keen on the business. So we went back to that buyer and we worked all the way through legals, due diligence, again, just about to complete the deal. And then at that point, the Turkish government decided to do a purge on internet gambling in the country. And they arrested my client and he was sent to prison in a sort of a midnight express type
Oh my god!
situation. And although he'd done nothing wrong, and he was released after about 3 or 4 months, not three or
Oh,
four days. And in the end, the deal went ahead with this particular buyer. So I think that was the weirdest by far. And I suppose the most surreal experience I've had doing deals is that I did a job for the chairman of Norwich Football Club was an investor in a deal that I sold, and he was very, very pleased with the result. So he said, "Oh, David, you must come and." He said, "I know you're a West Ham supporter." He said, "Come and watch Norwich versus West Ham." So I joined him one day at a pre-season friendly, Norwich versus West Ham, and it was the time that West Ham had been bought by a couple of Icelandic owners, and they'd been in the press. And anyway, the post-match meal was I was sitting around the table with Delia Smith and these two Icelandic owners, and
Julia Smith.
it was one of those moments where you just have to pinch yourself. Is this real? But it was brilliant, but it was just surreal being
What
in that
what
room.
was she like? Tell us.
Lovely lady, lovely lady. Yeah, really, really nice. Very friendly, very warm. Yeah.
Had you prepared any of the food?
I don't think she did, but obviously the food was good because I imagine she kept an eye on it.
Brilliant. And if you were to go back in time to David before your first deal and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Goodness, it's an interesting one. That first deal was okay.
Hmm.
It worked, and I think what we've done. It's not just one thing that jumps out and says, "Oh, we need to. I need to do this next time."
Hmm.
Over all the deals you've done, you accumulate knowledge and you sort of refine it. And things like ensuring you've got the culture, chemistry, and proposition is really important. You've got you ensure that you've got a process where you're comparing buyers for a business. So all of these little nuances, and there are probably many more that I use to help deals get away, or carry on as a sort of a wealth of experience, really. And I suppose that the underlying thing about that is you probably say, don't negotiate from a position of weakness. Try and always negotiate from a position of strength, and that's always important. So you're able to compare things, you have options, and if you have a buyer that's going to play hardball, you can easily move across to another buyer if it comes to it. So I think that's the thing, is try not to negotiate from a position of weakness all
And
the
I
time.
guess having someone like you in your corner helps you understand the amount of leverage you need and can have in any situation because you've been through this. You know what a position
Yes,
of strength looks like.
yes,
So
there are a lot of, exactly. There's not many things we haven't been through before. Yeah, even when your client goes to prison. Yeah.
it sounds like it. And you've clearly managed to maintain your passion for all of this after all these years, after 30 years of Marcom's M&A. What is
Yep.
it that's driving you?
I It's an interesting one because I am enthusiastic about it. I enjoy every deal, every client. I think I suppose I'm a great believer in having a sort of mission statement as a business, and our mission statement really is to create compelling deals that create maximum value, which then filters into the industry and flows into the wider economy. And I suppose that aspect of creating what is a compelling deal is the thing that gets you up in the morning, and you know, by finding the right buyer and making sure that there's a really interesting deal that comes of it, and that's the exciting thing rather than the spreadsheets and everything else. That pales in comparison. It's that's the exciting bit of it, and it keeps you going.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And the key thing I've taken away from all of this is culture, chemistry, and proposition, right?
That's it. That's it. Once you know that, you're fine.
Thank you so much for joining us, David. I've loved this conversation. And where can people go to find out more about you?
Yes, you can contact us. My email address is davidb at m&aadvisory.com. I'm on LinkedIn, David Blois. Our website is www.m&aadvisory.com. That's MANDAADVISORY. Yeah, be delighted to hear from anybody with any questions about this or their business prospects in terms of M&A or any other question.
Brilliant. Thank you again. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Adrian.
Bye.